welcome back to the channel. As you know, I'm Wade of Black Tie Barn, but today we have a special guest. This is Mel from Makesy. If you're not familiar with Makesy, of course, they are one of the world's largest, most innovative candle manufacturers or material manufacturers and suppliers in the world. I think most of you are probably fully aware who they are. We've talked about them before. We've demonstrated materials and making some of their products here on the channel as well. This is actually a two-part collaboration video. So part one is over on Makesy's YouTube channel, where we talked about creating and starting running a small business in 2023, or a candle business specifically in 2023. And this is part two of that collaboration, which is going to be talking about how to handle scaling your business, especially if you're a small business that is looking to grow. So with that being said, I'll let Mel chime in here and say hello and anything that she wants to share. And then again, just as a reminder, this is part two. So in the description below, if I forget to mention it again later, there is a link to part one of that video on their channel. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel as well.
Well, hi everyone. My name's Mel. A lot of you probably know me from our YouTube channel at Makesy, but super excited to be on today. Super excited to be here chatting with Wade. He's got a variety of knowledge. He is such a leader in the industry. We are very blessed to know him and work with him and also be one of his suppliers. So thanks for having us today, Wade, and look forward to the second part of this collaboration.
Same as well. I appreciate you reaching out and love doing part one, so I know this is going to be enjoyable as well. We were talking a little bit before, kind of on the end of the previous part one video, we started to touch on scaling your business. And so I guess before we get to that, if you are a brand new candle maker or someone that's just entering the industry at all and looking to either start a full-fledged business or just even a little passive side income, definitely check out all the resources out there. Makesy has them on your channel. I have plenty of videos here on this channel to talk about how to start a business and some tips and tricks along the way. But now that you're at that point, you've decided to do that, the next question always becomes, how do I scale that? And the biggest challenge that I faced when I began scaling was a little bit of what we talked about previously, which is the availability and reliability of your raw materials. And that is because as you scale, you need more of those materials. And it's very easy to, be able to source some of your main products, whether it's your vessels or your wax, when things are, at a smaller scale, at a smaller level. Then you get to that point where maybe you're getting wholesale orders, maybe you're getting some white label orders, or maybe you're just trying to build out your own storefront or your own e-commerce website. Now you suddenly need a lot more of the same material. And so one of the biggest challenges for me was making sure that I was choosing materials and suppliers that could meet those sourcing demands. And that is one of the first things you'll want to figure out as your business continues and starts to grow is, can I keep up with this if demand increases? And if not, what options do I have? And so for me, that was the first obstacle. Fortunately, I didn't have too many issues with that. I was already working with a lot of the largest suppliers, and I was already using materials that were fairly common. And so I chose to stand out with other things, whether that could be your labeling or your branding, maybe unique fragrances, something like that. But for me, I chose to stay a little streamlined with options as far as vessels and waxes go, because I didn't want to have any availability issues. I don't know, do you have any thoughts? I guess, you work with so many small businesses and new, handcrafters and candle makers, and being part of Makesy. What have you heard from others?
Yeah, I would say that probably the nail on the head has been the hardest for people this particular year, and maybe even since 2020. Yeah. Just hearing stories about people maybe starting with a different supplier, maybe getting something on Amazon and then realizing that they can't get it consistently, and then trying to switch over and get something consistently. And then even as a supplier, I'm sure many of you who've been with us for a while when we were the Wood and Wick Co. Had experience with us having supply chain issues, and then dealing with our pallets being stuck on the water for months and all this craziness. So
which was happening to everyone, by
everyone,
the way.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we were all affected by that. And it was a huge hurdle. But I think the main thing is just knowing that the company that you're sourcing from does usually have the stock and quantity of which you will want to be scaling for. Because if you buy from Amazon or other third-party sellers, sometimes you don't know exactly how much inventory they have. And it's nice to also have a liaison to talk to from your supplier, so that you can have more of a personal relationship. And so we have developed Maker Pro now, which is a really great tool for you guys to use, where you can have one-on-one consultations and really get that VIP experience with us and know exactly what's going on with your product. So trying to develop those relationships is really key, and knowing that they have the things that you need for sure.
Yeah, working with your suppliers is a must if you want to scale and grow. They're going to help. They are there for you. Their suppliers there's no benefit to suppliers not being able to provide the best service they can for their customers. They want you to grow. That helps them and it helps you. It's a win-win for both. So leverage your suppliers, leverage your resources. That will really go a long way to making sure you can sustain your business and your growth. And speaking of growth, the other obstacle that this is more of a mental obstacle, I think, but it's a question I get all the time. And this is about pricing your products and how to get those costs down. Well, without going into a ton of detail, I think most people would understand that the more scale, the more production you're doing, you're ordering more raw materials, you're ordering them in bulk. And when you do that, you're getting better pricing to begin with. So scaling can lower your cost. But and I think everyone kind of agrees with that, but where it gets really tricky is when you are working on to scale and you're working with retailers looking to wholesale products, white label clients, large companies wanting you to maybe private label for them, they're going to really want to pinch your margins a lot. They're trying to make a profit as well, and they're leveraging you and your business to do that. And so you do run these issues where you are having to do a lot more work, it seems, for less profit margin. And that's part of scaling. And it's very, very normal. And the two ways to combat that, or the two things that helped me, was, of course, first ordering raw materials in bulk, getting my cost down. That helps right out of the gate. And honestly, that's kind of a necessity if you're going to scale. And then part two of that is just understanding the difference between profit margin and gross profit. When you scale, your margins typically will go down when you're working with retailers and private labels and wholesale customers or clients, but your volume increases so much. That's really the whole, concept behind wholesale, is you're doing a lot more volume for less profit margin, but for overall more profit. And the key is finding that sweet spot between the two, because you don't want to be doing so much volume and so much work that even though it's pretty good overall profit, if it's a ton of work compared to the amount of time you're putting in, it's not going to be worth it, even if it is profit. And so, but on the flip side, you will have thinner margins when you take on some of these new accounts. And so you just got to find that sweet spot. And the only way to do that is to start doing it and learn as you go. Don't, be willing to work with suppliers and work with clients and try to compromise as much as you can, but don't ever worry about being able to say no, and sticking to your business and your goals. And I think the combination of just understanding that you're going to make more profit taking on larger accounts, but also lowering your cost by buying more in bulk will really start to kind of unveil the curtains and show you what the world can be like for your business if you're willing to kind of embrace those changes, those differences, because it is a big difference between being your own small business selling only from your website. It's a different world when you start scaling, and there's a lot of advantages to it, but it is different.
Yeah, and actually that's a great thing to consider too, Wade. I was thinking as you were sharing about that, I was like, what does the jump look like? Like, would you say for someone who has those dreams of scaling that that it's a fairly easy process to transition from like 20 units a month to like 300 units a month and X and so on and so forth? Like, what does that look like to do you take the orders first, or do you prepare for wholesale and then start seeking out wholesale?
That's a good question. Honestly, this is a topic that we could do like several videos on. Yeah. And actually it needs it. But I highlight the main things is, I think the first question is, how do you know when you should scale? Like, what's that line? How do you know when it's time to invest in that? And then of course, what are some tips during that process? Well, for me, I think knowing when to do it is all about just your trajectory. Like if you were to take your business sales on a line graph and watch it going like this. And then at some point, if it kind of plateaus and flatlines, you've kind of hit capacity. And that flat line could be because you just can't do more, or it could be because this is all the market is asking for your product at this point, which means something usually needs to change. So when I see any trajectory kind of do that, to me, that's key number one, like red flag number one, not red flag. I mean, you're still doing good, but that's symptom number one that something should probably change or could change. And so for me, once my output started kind of met my input, in other words, I was working this amount just to get this out the door, and it was leaving no room. Like I was just so busy doing this to get this. That was the point where I was like, all right, I got to scale. I don't have a choice at this point. And then what does scaling mean? So what are those processes? Well, for me, it was I need to delegate more, which I'm still terrible about doing, by the way. And then putting in processes to help you do that. That I'm pretty good at, but it's a lot better if you can pair that with delegating and actually getting more help. And so for me, it's putting in a system of processes that, like you're talking about, I don't know that there's a right or wrong if you should pre-stock or make as you go. I think more than anything, it's just having, this is how my business operates. This is the process that I follow. Here are my lead times. Here is like basically create a SOP or standard operating procedure for your business. This is how we do things. And if you have something to guide you, it makes everything easier down the road. Got a process in place, it's easier to adapt and change that process to help you out. So for me, I kind of do a hybrid. I will try to stock for my own products as much as possible. But if I run out or low on something, I'll sell it till it's out. But I won't typically sometimes make more of that. And if I know that a large order is coming, or I'm going to be making some of that anyways. And so I'm not afraid to leave something out of stock for a couple of weeks if I know that I'm going to be making it along with a lot of other products that are similar.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's, best practice. I think a lot of people would tell you, well, you're missing potential sales. And that's true. I probably am. But for me, it's about managing workload. And if I'm having to stop to make, one-off products here and there or small batches constantly, that's not very efficient for me. And that's how I actually got myself into trouble, which is constantly being busy all the time. So for me, that's my process. Is if I'm getting low on something, I try to consolidate and batch my production. I will try to pair it with large wholesale and white label account orders. And so if those are coming in, those I do typically, to answer your question, make to order. I'm not going to make a ton of stock that I have no idea if it's going to go anywhere. I keep some for samples and things, but I'll wait for those orders to come in and give them estimates on lead times. And that's how I scale those. Now I do have future plans to actually white label more of my own products, and I'll have that on the website. In those cases, there's nothing different. They'll just be unlabeled, and those I will stock and just have those more available at any given time. Whether or not I get to that, I have no idea, but that's the plans. But yeah, for me, it's all about processes and having a plan for everything. I'm trying to think if you had another specific question about scaling. I know you asked about like stocking ahead or making as you go. Did you have another example question?
I think that was like mostly what like the question that I did have. But I think in terms of just like general tips, like what is like maybe your top 3 tips for someone to have to prepare for scaling, to get them through the scaling process, and then thinking into the future, like what kind of does that process look like?
Well, I touched on it a little bit in part 1 for a different reason, but my first tip would be reputable suppliers. You can never guarantee that any supplier that you work with is going to have something that you want or need 24/7, 365. It's just not possible. But finding ones that you can rely on and trust on for the most part, that sell products and materials that you like, and forming a relationship with them. So that's step 1, good suppliers. Step 2 for me is leaning on resources, and that could be the suppliers. That can be people that have gone through what you're trying to do. Like the YouTube channels, for example. I talk about my story a lot in a way to try to help others that have kind of similar situations. And so I think using resources, good suppliers, delegating for sure. Like when you've reached the point where you're scaling, that's the time to bring in help if you haven't already. And I was very late to that party. I'm like, again, horrible about that. So do as I say, not as I do on that. Do not mimic anything that I'm talking about here as far as how I do it. But delegating and putting in, well, this is a general rule, I guess, for me about running a business and scaling. The more work you put in early on, it's going to be a lot. But the more work you do up front, so much smoother sailing down the road. And if you get these processes in place and figure out your suppliers and get through all these headaches of like, how do I set this up for future success? You're doing all that hard work up front, and it's just so much easier to keep that boat rowing as you scale. And if waves come in and start, rocking the boat, you can weather that storm a little bit better. Wow, I just did that metaphor on the fly. That was pretty good. And it just makes your life easier. It really does. And again, I'm saying a lot of this tongue in cheek because like I'm just laughing at myself because I know that's the right thing to do, and I'm not that great at it. But sometimes it's better to be a coach than a player, and I'm not always the greatest at some of the stuff I talk about doing, but it's still the right thing to do. And I'm working on doing these same things all the time myself. For me, I'm throwing new things into my business all the time. I started the YouTube channel last year or year before, started getting into other aspects of the business with content. And so my plans have changed, and that's part of what has thrown little curveballs at me. But we all are going to have those in our business, and they're all just going to be a little bit different. And I think the more that you can keep things process driven, the better. And then the last tip that I would give as far as scaling is, and again, sort of touched on earlier, is about simplifying as much as possible. It doesn't mean you can't have fun and be creative. Doesn't mean you can't have several fragrances that you want or unique styles of jars and options and colors. It just means if you want to scale, sometimes the best thing to do is take one step back so that your next step can be a lot bigger. And if you're trying to do way too many things at once, trying to juggle all those balls and scale all of that is very, very difficult. If I can, if I'm selling 4 jars all the time, different size and shapes of jars, and I want to scale, I might take the 2 that are doing the best and use those to then purchase those in bulk and save money, lower my cost by doing that, and focus on driving those as the kind of bread and butter. So that'd be kind of all over the place there, but that'd be my general tips on scaling.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great, Wade. I think that's super helpful. What was that aha moment when you were like, okay, now it's time to scale, like now it's scaling time, or like when you realized that like that was the reality of what was happening with your business? Like what was that process, or what happened kind of like in your business?
Well, for quite a while, I would get requests for things that I just had to say no to. I just couldn't do it, couldn't keep up. And after a while of doing that, those requests continued to kind of stack on each other. And so at some point, I just kind of stepped back and said, all right, my business is doing this and it's been growing, fairly consistently, but at some point it's going to plateau. And at that point, I got to make a change. And so it became a fork in the road for me. Do I want to continue doing this and just keep myself at capacity? Or do I want to take the step and say, no, I want to take on some larger stuff. It's time for me to scale. And that was the aha moment for me, is getting a bunch of requests I couldn't fulfill, but I wanted to, getting a lot of requests for wholesale, but I couldn't do it. And then more than anything, working hard all the time to try to make all these products and sell them. But even though I'm making a ton, the costs weren't coming down. The only way to combat that is to scale. It's really the only option you have. And so I think some of it's organic. You just over time kind of get forced to scale, whether you meant to or not. And other times it's a conscious decision. And for me, it was a little bit of both.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. That's gold nugget right there.
Well, I would want to ask you from Makesy's perspective, your perspective working with small businesses, do you have any tips, or have you encountered any things that you think would be beneficial to share for small businesses looking to grow a little bit further?
Wow. Yeah. So for small businesses looking to grow further, I would say, aside from the amazing tips that Wade already said, I would echo each of those things. The relationship suppliers, the making sure that you're utilizing bulk discounts, then making sure that your margins are high enough to where it can cover the cost so you can scale comfortably without hemorrhaging money, or without it being too tight where you can't support yourself anymore, or you can't hire a worker to outsource. So you really want to make sure that when you are setting your prices, whether it be for wholesale or for your retail, that you have enough margin on there. We usually recommend a 50 to 70% margin. So that is probably like the main thing, is making sure that your margins are healthy. So that you can do that comfortably. Obviously, there's no scaling without a little bit of pinching the pocket for your overheads to increase, but then over time it will even out. And then some of the tips that you had, Wade, of making sure that you are focusing on your best sellers. That is also a really great strategy, so that you know that you're always can expect X amount of cash flow from your X amount of units that are your best sellers. And then kind of weeding out the non-ones and focusing on the best sellers for a little while to help even out those margins. Space is also another big thing. As you know, candle making can take up a lot of space. And so also thinking, as you are scaling, making sure that you have a small warehouse or a retail space or a place in your house that you can store, make, and comfortably ship your products. That's something that you want to factor in, and you can consider that also when setting your margins for your prices, because obviously the more overhead you have, the more comes out of your cash flow and all that good stuff. So making sure that you're doing that. Wade has an awesome studio space that he set up in his warehouse here. That's beautiful.
This is the middle of a disaster warehouse. You just can't see the rest right now, but yeah, it's working out well so far.
Which is awesome. So you can get creative. You can make little spaces in other spaces if you need to. Be creative with your space. And being smart with that decision and making sure that you have enough space. And then I would say the final thing is coming back to the delegation, is that you can't be a one-woman army forever. And there comes a point where you have X amount of time and capacity and you'll need to get help. So you can always factoring labor into your costs when you do your COGS is really important at the beginning stages of your business. And we actually will be launching a masterclass, surprise. We call it masterclass, but it's a very comprehensive online course that's not put on by Masterclass. And we'll be launching that very soon, actually. And we kind of go over the COGS and how to calculate a labor cost of goods. So I would say those are my top tips. And to just, with the mindset thing, just focus on where you're going. It will be challenging at times, and just remember that you have a community around you that you can work with and get tips from, and that we're all in this together. And that if starting a business was easy and scaling a business was easy, everyone would do it. And so just know that there are challenges, but it is one of the most rewarding things that you can do. So
yeah, I appreciate that. And I like that you brought up the profit margin, gross profit margin. That is important to know. And I like to even try to shoot even for a little bit higher than you mentioned, just because you know that when you start doing larger accounts, it's going to come down even further. Right. So I'm glad you brought that up. I wasn't really thinking about that. And same thing with also including labor or wages into your cost of goods. And we don't get into that right now, but and for others, that's kind of a new thing to consider. You know, that's meant for your wages of delegating and getting help. So paid help to create your products. You want that in. You don't want to base that labor or wages off of like what you want to make as a salary as a business owner. Very different. So just consider wages of someone helping you as part of your costs. So yeah, anyways, don't want to go on a whole side rail conversation there, but I appreciate you for like I said, reaching out and for doing this 2-part collaboration. Again, I'm Wade with Black Tie Barn. This is Mel with Makesy, and part 1 of this video about starting a candle business 2023 is over on their channel. I will have a link in the description below for that, and definitely subscribe to their channel if you haven't already. And with that being said, if you don't have anything else to say, then just wanted to say thank you all for tuning in and for watching as usual. You guys are awesome. And yeah, we'll see you next time.